Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Netzer, inaugural Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Director of the McMullen Museum and Professor of Art History at Boston College. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this member's preview lecture for Collaborating in Conflict, the Yeats Family and the Public Arts, which is now on view in our Daly Family and Monin galleries. This exhibition explores, for the first time, the immense and multifaceted impact that three generations of the extraordinarily talented Yeats family had on cultural life and the public arts in Ireland during a century that was crucial to that nation's history. This project would not have been possible without the dedication and expertise of our talented teams at the McMullen Museum, the John J. Burns Library, and the Irish Studies program. And we're also deeply grateful for the generous support of Boston College, the McMullen Family Foundation, the patrons of the McMullen Museum, chaired by C. Michael Daly and Vice Chair James McDermott, the John C. Donahoe Estate, Robert and Anne Marie Reardon, and the Anna Frances Fergelli Ryan Estate. Additional support has been provided by William J. Lundergan and by Elaine Stein Cummins in memory of Daniel Cummins. It's now my privilege to introduce our distinguished speakers, the three co-curators of the exhibition. Marjorie Howes is Professor of English and Irish Studies at Boston College and a leading scholar in the field. Her research focuses on 19th and 20th century Irish literature. She's the author of Colonial Crossings, Figures in Irish Literary History, and of Yeats's Nations, Gender, Class, and Irishness. Her work has appeared in Air Ireland and numerous other journals, and she has co-edited The Irish Revival, A Complex Vision, the 6-volume series Irish Literature in Transition, Yeats and Afterwards, and the Cambridge Companion to W.B. Yeats. She has also contributed essays to several catalogs accompanying McMullen Museum exhibitions, including The Arts and Crafts Movement, Making It Irish, Rural Ireland, The Inside Story, and Airland. Christian Dupont is Associate University Librarian for Scholarly Resources and Burns Librarian at Boston College, where he oversees the rare and archival collections of the John J. Burns Library, renowned for its holdings in Irish history, literature, culture, and traditional music. He holds a PhD in theology. He's published on wide-ranging topics and is a regular contributor to the Irish Arts Review. Diana Larsen is Assistant Director at the McMullen Museum for Exhibition Design, Collections Management, and Curatorial Affairs, where she has co-curated exhibitions and contributed to catalogs, including Rural Ireland, Inside Story, the Arts and Crafts Movement, Making It Irish, Eaglemania, Collecting Japanese Art in Gilded Age America, and Arnie Jarmack, Photographing Chelsea in Transition. Our speakers will present for approximately 50 minutes, after which we will have time for questions. Please feel free to submit questions through the chat feature as the lecture unfolds. And now, it's my great pleasure to invite our speakers to share their screen and begin their presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will share my screen and get us into the slideshow. I want to say a few words of introduction to the show overall. I think the exhibition is pretty unprecedented in a couple of ways. It covers 3 generations of the Yeats family, 7 individual family members in all. It brings together over 200 objects and involves a wide array of media: sketching, drawing, painting, literature, theater, embroidery, and printing and publishing. It was created in partnership with major Irish institutions, private collections, and the McMullen Museum and the Burns Library. Some of our objects are being displayed publicly for the first time. I'll just introduce the family members briefly. John Butler Yeats trained as a lawyer, but spent the rest of his life pursuing a career as a portrait painter. And he did most of the portraits that are featured in the exhibition. He and his wife had 4 children. William became one of Ireland's best-known writers. Jack is now acknowledged as one of the country's most important painters. Jack's wife, Cotty, was also an artist in her own right. Lily became a skilled embroiderer and was the head of an embroidery business. Elizabeth became an art teacher, a publisher, and a printer, and she ran the Dun Emer Press and then the Kula Press. In the next generation, William's daughter, Anne, became a stage designer and a visual artist. We had several curatorial goals. We wanted to look into relationships among generations and family members in an important and influential family, and to examine how their family dynamics and family circumstances shaped their artistic output. We wanted to explore the interrelations between different media and between high art and craft work, because it was through such interrelations that the Yeats family created and experienced their artistic lives. Each family member had interests and talents in more than one art form. We wanted to offer viewers several different but related ways to view the objects. On the one hand, to view them as accomplished, finished end products, pieces in their own right. And on the other hand, as embodying artistic processes that contain distinct steps. So things like stencils, drafts, and preliminary sketches are also included in the exhibition. And then there was a third hand, and that was to be able to view the objects as important factors, both helpful and challenging, in a family's economic struggles. It wasn't easy to make a living as a member of this family. A final curatorial aim was that we wanted to highlight the artistic accomplishments of the women in the Yeats family, which are less well known than the achievements of the men. There's been a rise of interest recently over the last few decades in Ireland in the women of the family, and we wanted to bring their achievements before an American audience. When we were thinking about organizing it, it quickly became clear that having a section devoted to each individual family member would violate all those curatorial goals and just wouldn't work. Individuality was pretty exactly not the point. The point was relationships, relationships between media, relationships between people. And those relationships, as the exhibition title suggests, involved affection and support and collaboration. They also involve tension, resentment, and conflict. It was also clear that an exhibition this complex and varied needed a kind of a strong narrative to organize it, to give it coherence, to avoid chaos. And we realized that telling a single story wouldn't do either. So we devised 3 overlapping narratives or chronologies on different scales And that's how he structured it. So first, a journey from childhood to adulthood. Second, a transition from the private home to the public sphere. And third, Ireland's political transformation from being a part of Great Britain to being an independent nation. So in the exhibition, we begin by introducing family and the places that were important to them, especially the Sligo area in the west of Ireland. Then we explore youth as a shaping origin and as a site of entertainment and education and a place of memory. We move on to adulthood and the private home, examining the Yeats family's participation in the Irish version of the arts and crafts movement, which advocated the production of beautiful handcrafted objects for household use. Lily and Elizabeth ran Dun Emer and then Kula Industries, businesses that were part of that movement. Following that, we consider how the family's work shaped public life in Ireland through performance, publishing, and supporting cultural institutions. The final section looks at the Yeats' response to the struggle for Irish independence and their engagement with the political and cultural identity of the new nation. So we're in the first section, which is portraits of the family. John Butler, this is a self-portrait by John Butler Yeats, and this is his portrait of his wife. When they got married, she was expecting him to become a lawyer and maintain a lifestyle that she was used to, and he didn't. He left law almost immediately, never made any money as an artist. And she, as a result, his wife was a kind of long-suffering figure. It also meant that his children were basically forced to develop careers when they were teenagers, 18, 19, 20, something like that. And that worked out actually pretty well for the artistic world. Um, John's philosophy of portrait painting involved something called a sight size technique. He would stand back he positioned the portrait and the sitter right next to each other, and he would stand back and look at them together, and then he would he would walk to the canvas and paint, and before standing back again. So the contemporary accounts of him, his studio involved it was always full of people. He was very social, he was very charming, and he'd be striding back and forth between the canvas and his further away vantage point. He also thought that a portrait should not just capture the sitter's external appearance, but that it should reveal something about the character, or he would even use the term the soul. And this is his portraits of his sons, William and Jack. And I think William's portrait really captures his kind of slightly brooding, poetic intensity. At this point, he's a wannabe writer, and he's just starting his literary career. Jack, by all accounts, had kind of a very sunny disposition. He tended to get along with everybody and was largely exempt from many of the conflicts that the rest of the family were part of. This is the next generation. This is Anne, and I think in a lot of ways her entire career as an artist, but also as a kind of steward of the Yeats legacy, involved upholding various family traditions, in this case, portraiture, but also putting her own very distinctive and sometimes slightly wry take on them. So here she's positioning herself kind of like we're in an official portrait, and yet this picture was taken in a photo booth. So this is the kind of Anne Yeats, and she has a slight grin. You can see there that this is kind of a joke about traditional portraiture. This is one of Jack's paintings. Portraiture for Jack in particular was not simply about reproducing the appearance of a sitter who's in front of you or a family member. This A Silence is um, a deeply moving meditation on sort of family and memory and loss. Uh, by most accounts, this painting features Jack himself, um, probably a younger version of his wife, Cotty, and then several people who have died. And he's bringing them together. This family group is only possible in kind of memory. Um, Now we're going to move on to places that were important to the family. This is quite a rare painting by William Butler Yeats, who is best known, of course, for being a writer. He did, however, go to art school, like his siblings. And this painting is of the estate of Lady Augusta Gregory, who, from pretty early on in his career, uh, became his patron, his friend, his collaborator. It was a very important relationship for him, and her house at Cool was a very important refuge for William. He would go there to rest and to get work done and to feel supported. This is
Oh,
um, one of Lily's, she called them needle pictures. Um, Very popular and beautiful landscapes. And actually, Diana, could I invite you just to say a line or two about this one?
absolutely. I want to just acknowledge that we have a world expert on embroidery with us in the audience today. So Lynn Hulse, who wrote an essay for our catalog, is with us. And so therefore, if I make a mistake with the stitches, please forgive me. But this is a wonderful rendering. We could say possibly it is the Wicklow Mountains that she would have seen from her studio, possibly, or in the area where she lived. Um, you see the mountains in the distance. It's a beautiful needle picture with uh, beautiful foxgloves and meadowsweet in the foreground, rendered with dimensional French knots. When you see this, you see the foil of these foreground plants setting off the distant mountains. Also characteristic, I'll just point out, is the ground, which is blue poplin. It's an Irish woven, hand woven material with equal weights of silk and wool weft. So the blue ground is what she embroidered upon. And you see it over and over in the show, this poplin. And it has sort of a ribbed effect, so it has dimensionality, but it's very effective here as the sky. And then, of course, the foreground flowers just set this off, and there's some lovely little blackbirds flying in the distance.
Mhm.
There we go.
Great. And this is a watercolor by Elizabeth, landscape with cottage in the west. The entire Yeats family had important connections to the Irish Revival, which was this movement that celebrated distinctive Irish culture and language. It was kind of a cultural nationalist movement. And to revivalists, the west of Ireland was considered often the most authentically Irish region of the country, the least anglicized. Uh, and a lot of Elizabeth's paintings are landscapes of one kind or another. This is by Jack, one of his relatively early works. And the difference between Jack and Elizabeth was that Jack was also very, very interested in the west of Ireland. He loved Sligo. Sligo was more important to him than it was to any other family member. He actually lived in Sligo for 7 years with his grandparents, while the rest of his family was elsewhere, perhaps in part to save money because they were struggling financially. When Jack thought about the west of Ireland, he thought not primarily of the landscapes, but he thought of the people. So his focus was on the people who lived there. This is um, Blue Waters by Anne. And I would say that here again, she's kind of referencing a family tradition, in this case, the depiction of landscapes and seascapes. But here, again, as with the portrait, she's putting her own spin on it. So we're just getting the water. Now we are into the section on youth. This is a Jack watercolor that is a kind of composite image of his memories of Sligo. You can see in the image that kind of weird looking statue in the water is something called the Metal Man, and something he would have seen repeatedly. William, when he published the first volume of his autobiography, he wanted to use this plate and also the title, Memory Harbor, which I think is a very resonant title, to be the title of his autobiography. That didn't work out because somebody else had just used it. But this shows that memories of Sligo were really important for the family for the rest of their lives. This is a relatively early work by Jack depicting a man in the west of Ireland. He went to great pains often to depict rural Irish people as having dignity and purpose. Some critics have seen in this a certain degree of idealization. I think if we put it in the context of the Irish revival, however, one thing the revival sought to do was to counter negative stereotypes that would have been quite common in Britain, and present the Irish people as worthy of attention and respect. Jack also, this image also illustrates that Jack began his career as an illustrator for periodicals, which is a kind of work that emphasizes sort of direct expression, firm lines, capturing figures in action. It's a kind of work that was less available after the rise of photography because it's kind of having the same function. But you can see here the influence of his work as an illustrator. Jack, although he did depict people in the west of Ireland very positively, he also found ways to acknowledge that life out there among what was then referred to as the Irish peasantry could be pretty harsh. And there was a lot of poverty. And so depicting more somber scenes like this one was one way of at least partially acknowledging that. From quite early on in his career, Jack developed the habit of, he carried a sketchbook with him pretty much everywhere he went. And he would jot little sketches into them. And then he would, when he got home, he would draw on them to produce paintings. He basically did this for his whole life. He produced something like 200 sketchbooks over the course of his career. This is an invitation to a private viewing. Jack's trying to sell some paintings here. One of the exhibition themes is to look at these artists as also business people who often really struggled to make a living. So we have some kind of ephemeral objects documenting that. Jack first became known as someone who depicted, as it says here, life in the west of Ireland. And that's a thing that he was known for the better part of his career. We're now into a different section of youth, entertainment and education. Jack had a lifelong interest in theater. He built a toy theater, like Diana made one for our exhibition. Um, he wrote plays for it. He performed them every year at Christmas time for local children. And this is here we have a painting of a child engaging with a toy theater, just like the one that Jack made. Here's the one that Diana made, which looks, I think, great. You could move the figures around. They and you could also move the scenery around, so it actually had kind of some moving parts to it. The family was also very interested in education. Uh, most of the family members had fairly unconventional views on traditional education. John was quite unhappy when he was sent to boarding school. Uh, None of them really remembered traditional education particularly fondly. And they often, in their ideas about education, they emphasized exposing children to the arts. Uh, Elizabeth not only became an art teacher to quite small children, she was trained as a kindergarten teacher. She also wrote books about how to teach art to children. And this is one of those. This is another slide from that. And this, when Lily and Elizabeth were running the arts and crafts businesses, first Dunnemer and then Kula, Lily ran the embroidery shop and Elizabeth ran the press. Here we have a stencil that Elizabeth produced, which would have been used by Lily's students. Both Lily and Elizabeth were in their business enterprises, were very committed to educating the young women, and they were often very young women who worked for them. And they taught them not just tools of the trade, which is what this would have been used for, but also they got them Irish lessons, they gave them art lessons, they gave them theater tickets. They wanted generally to educate the young women who worked for them. And this sampler would be another example of something that was probably used to help employees at their business enterprises learn their trade. This is the section in which we explore more about Lily and Elizabeth's participation in the arts and crafts movement, which again is dedicated to advocating handcrafted objects that are aesthetically pleasing, but that are also useful. And they produced a wide range of things. This is a fan painted by Elizabeth, and it's got a quotation from one of William's early poems on it. This is Elizabeth's dance card. The young Yeatses were struggling financially. They were becoming artists in various ways. They also had time to have fun, like other young people. And so Elizabeth used this before a Gaelic League dance to keep track of who she'd promised what dance to. And this was designed by Jack. This is a baby's bonnet with some lovely embroidery on it. They did produce clothing. Elizabeth designed this. This was a cushion cover. And this was a fire screen, which they also produced. So the range of objects was really quite striking. And they were always looking for new objects to produce and new ways to sell them. And now I might hand things back to Diana just for a couple of minutes. This is by Lily.
Yes, this is actually a very good example of Lily was very, very talented in working with a wide range of designers throughout her career, as we'll see. This is an example that she collaborated with a Russian emigre designer named Boris Unrep, who was a mosaicist and actually worked, his mosaics can be found in many major institutions in London, such as the National Gallery of Art, for example. This is an interesting story, very complex imagery, but it depicts Fisa and his harp based on a poem that Anrep wrote. But this is quite unique for Lily because it is all using ranges of browns and tones of browns, but also with accentuated the hair and the harp strings using metallic gold thread. It's really very beautiful and quite different from many of the other things you'll see in the exhibition.
Mhm. This is an Anne Yeats work, and I think its connection to the arts and crafts movement is that not not by producing an object, but by producing visual art that takes an ordinary object, a household object, lamps, and basically makes them the object of aesthetic contemplation. So once again, I would see Anne as having her own spin on something that the generations before her were interested in. This is a very striking embroidery by Maud Gunn, who famously William Yeats was pursued romantically and, alas, unsuccessfully for decades. Um, Maud and William shared a very serious interest in the occult and in kind of very alternative forms of religion. And I think a lot of the imagery and symbolism on the embroidery comes from the adult traditions that they were studying together. I don't know if Christian, if you want to add a line or two to this. This is from the Burns Library.
Sure. Maybe a couple of things here. So this we acquired through a collector named Loretta Clark Murray, who was a personal friend of Anna McBride White, so daughter of Maud Gunn. So this is something that, like many objects, that have sort of descended through the family. Unfortunately, unlike the FISA, which we actually worked with the National Gallery to do some conservation work to restore, this object had been badly cared for many years, and that's where you're seeing the damage in the background. And but it has been conserved as much as it can be for its age and its state there. And so, what's very curious about it is, of course, this the symbolism. And I've even talked with Lynn Hulse about this, our embroidery expert online here, and we can't figure out who actually did the embroidery work. We know that Maud designed it because all the iconography is clearly drawn from pen and ink sketches she did for a book called Celtic Wonder Tales. It was authored by Ellie Young, and again about the mythologies and not so much an occult interest, but this deep Celtic mythology being brought into to conversation in the 20th century. Ellie Young actually started the whole spiritualist movement in California when she emigrated. So there's many radiating branches like the Rogania sun that you can see in the middle of this embroidery. But again, this is where objects placed in an exhibition like this one in particular are really invitations to do further research. This is one of the first times that this has been exhibited publicly, apart from a smaller show we did 10 years ago in Burns Library.
Mm-hmm. And this is a fascinating object. When Elizabeth and Lily were first running Dunn Emer Enterprises, they kept a scrapbook, and they kept business records in it, records of their activities, and the young women who worked for them were invited to write a little poem or an essay or draw a little picture. So it was them self-consciously documenting what they were doing. It was also part of their mission to bring a kind of cultural enrichment to the young women who worked for them. And in the exhibition, we have a monitor which cycles through other pages in the scrapbook, so you can get a sense of just the variety of things that we find there. John Emer and Kula were also businesses, and they were not easy businesses to run. And Lily and Elizabeth traveled. They took their wares to shows in other cities. When they went visiting, they often used social connections to try and sell things. They went to America. Sometimes the international market was also important for them. So just these items like this they're not works of art, but they're very important in helping us do research into how did they make a living? How did they sell these things? How did they promote them? And we wanted to get that side of the Yeats family's artistic production into the story that we're trying to tell with the exhibition, the practical as well as the aesthetic. Now we're moving from the private home to the public sphere and public spaces. William was very, very interested in performance, in theater. And in fact, his very earliest literary productions many of them were verse plays. He was also very interested in basically poetry as an oral bardic art, so poetry as spoken, but he didn't want it just to be spoken. He experimented with chanting poetry and poetic verse to music, and the musical instrument that he settled on was called a psaltery. And Lily made this embroidery, and it's illustrating 2 lines from a poem that William wrote about using the psaltery and speaking verse to it on stage. Lily actually did 2 pictures of the psaltery in very, very different styles. And this is the second one. The psaltery in this picture is, I believe, more accurately representing the psaltery that Yeats was using. It was custom made for him by a guy called Arnold Dolmetsch. And so it has a different shape from the psaltery in the exhibition. We couldn't get the real psaltery for the exhibition, so we actually just bought one. But anyway, you can see what it looks like. Yeah. Jack was also very interested in public performance. And a number of his paintings depict performances of one kind or another. And I think what we see in Jack generally is there's a continuum of performance. On the one hand, we have formal performances that are very clearly on stage, like this one. Although in this particular painting, by all accounts, this is a painting of an audience member who has come onto the stage during the intermission to sing a song. So there's an informal aspect to it too. Other Jack paintings of performance are even less formal, in the open air, spontaneous. And he was also quite alert to how the contemporary politics of his day were actually, as politics are today, they were full of performances, both spontaneous and planned. So here's another representation of somebody singing, performing. In this case, she seems to be in a railway carriage. So again, it's a kind of spontaneous or less formal performance. The Yeats family was also hugely important in helping to create and support various cultural institutions in Ireland. The most well-known would be the Abbey Theatre. William, in particular, was one of the three main founders of the Abbey. His siblings all contributed in one way or another, but it was William who was really central. Lily did this wonderful embroidery of the Abbey Theater then in the early 1930s. This is a striking painting by Anne that in part, I think, shows the influence of her regular trips to Paris. Also, it has, I think, a kind of performative political dimension to it. This is a very conservative Ireland in the mid 20th century, and we have a woman walking alone in an urban setting at night, which would be potentially transgressive. And if that sounds far-fetched, when Anne exhibited this painting, the president of Ireland called it a disgrace to Irish womanhood. So she had clearly struck some kind of nerve. And I think what she's really performing here is autonomy, transgression, call it either of those things. Anne was also a stage designer, and she actually worked at the Abbey Theater for a period of time, even after she basically lost her job after William's death for various reasons, but she continued to freelance. And this is a design for the costume in one of the productions that she freelanced for. Different aspect of shaping public life, printing and publishing. Jack didn't just paint. He made various kinds of prints. This one was apparently not made to be sold, but he was just kind of playing with stencils. A broad sheet was in part kind of harking back to the tradition of peddlers wandering around fairs and markets and streets selling ballads. Usually they would sell them in single sheets. Jack loved ballads. He collected them. He had a huge collection of them. And in this publication, he combined visual art by himself and others, and also literature words. This is a broadside, which is also printed, also Jack, also combining text and visual images. Broadsides were a little different. They were smaller, and they were basically designed to be collected. They kind of came in sets, and you could even get a box that you could sort of store them in. So in terms of marketing things that were produced by Kula Press, we can think in terms of a continuum from stuff that would be quite expensive, like the high-end books the press was producing, down to things that were much more affordable. So they're targeting different markets. Christmas cards would be one of the most popular, also one of the most readily affordable. They were commercially quite helpful to the press. This is a greeting card. They also did general greeting cards. In this case, this one reproduces one of William's poems. These are prints, basically designed to be hung decoratively, I think, on a wall. They're hand colored, so they're printed on the printing press, but then they're hand colored. This particular one quotes a poem by William. These are also designed to be hung. This is Jack, again, returning to the subject matter, the west of Ireland, but not in a painting, but in something that is to be reproduced. As his career went on, Jack became increasingly uncomfortable with the reproduction of his work. He did give things to Kula to print and sell, but at a certain point, he decided, no, you need to be standing in front of my painting or you can't experience it because reproduction kind of was a lesser form. So eventually he stopped producing such things with Kula. This is another one of those suitable for hanging. Jack loved horses. He didn't, as far as I'm aware, particularly ride a lot, but one of his favorite subjects was horses in action. When he was young and living in Sligo with his grandparents, he constantly wandered around to things like markets or fairs or races and other kinds of sports. He was a huge sports fan, really all his life, not just horse racing, but also, say, boxing. Anyway, so he liked to capture horses especially, but sports generally in action. Christian, did you want to add anything to this section?
Sure, maybe a couple of points. First of all, printing, and you mentioned, Marjorie, that Jack was the frequent collaborator in terms of producing drawings that then would actually be photographed and then transposed onto zinc blocks for printing by Elizabeth and her assistants there, Essie and Molly. So they have the appearance of being woodcuts in the drawing styles, but they're actually reproduced photomechanically and then hand colored, as you pointed out, by the women who are working with Elizabeth in the Kula Press shop there. In addition to the prints which are featured here, of course, they were printing books as well, most of which did not have the hand coloring in them, but sometimes had again, illustrated material by Jack and many other artists. So just as Lily, as Diana had pointed out, do interpreted designs by many different artists in her embroidery, so too Kula Press printed many different designs in their cards. And so what we see here in your comments, Marjorie, about Jack moving more into painting is what happened during this period. A lot of these examples we've seen are from the early decades, late 1890s and the 1910s into the 20s, but by the 30s, he's really painting and doing much less work for Kula. So that's where we see this divergence too among, so collaboration, but divergence, not necessarily conflict in this case here. But the other thing we're seeing that's thematically is Jack, sometimes we say, is this a romanticized view or is it a really more authentic view of life in the West? One can debate that, and then one also can set it against the increasing urban life to which Jack, of course, was exposed to, the rest of the family in London or in Dublin or New York City, to which he traveled as well. But we find that Jack's affections are really, with the landscape of Ireland and preserving that. You feel that nostalgia there, and his joy and pleasure in it. And so that's very different than what we were seeing earlier, even with William, and who had the more mystical sort of thoughts, or in his relationship with Maud Gonne, whether it's occultish or mythological. We see much more straightforward depictions of life, and particularly rural life in Jack. So again, thinking of divergence among the siblings here in their artistic taste and visions.
Okay, imagining a new nation, the art of revolution. The Yeats family lived through the 1916 Easter Rising, which eventually kind of leads to the Irish War of Independence and the Civil War, and then eventually the establishment of the Irish Free State. Jack painted very few overtly political paintings, but he was increasingly, as his life went on, sympathetic to Irish Republicans. And this painting depicts a political meeting in the west of Ireland. And it kind of, it suggests something, I think, about his sense of living through really very turbulent political times. There's a kind of ominous nature to the painting. And the Yeatses they paid attention to the news, and they understood that there was a lot of upheaval and a lot of change and some violence occurring in Ireland. Here's another example of that. This is Lily. And this is an embroidery of the GPO, which is the General Post Office in Dublin. It was a key building site. It was a key site in the Easter Rising. It was taken over by the rebels who held out there until they were forced to surrender to the British. Much of the General Post Office was actually destroyed in the course of the Rising. And here we have Lily embroidering the rebuilt GPO after the establishment of Ireland as an independent state. This painting is basically about, I think, the Irish Civil War, which had just ended in 1924. It's over in 1923. One interesting thing about this is that both the people standing on the ground looking up and the people whose faces you can see in the window are women. And the new Irish government during the Civil War put not just Republican men, but some Republican women in prison, including two young women who worked for the Cooler Press, were in prison for a time. This shows us Jack's sense of kind of the intersection between performance, theatricality, and politics. So it's not entirely clear if this figure's on a stage or if he's playing some kind of military or political leader. But Jack was quite keenly attuned to seeing performance, not just on stage, but also kind of on the larger political stage that the family was all very well aware of. After independence, there were a number of cultural and national discourses in Ireland wanting to establish a kind of independent Irish identity to go along with their new political independence, privileged the idea of Ireland as primarily a rural place. And of course, it was pretty rural at the time. The land had, for centuries, been an important part of pretty much any version of Irish nationalism that you could think of. So here we see some watercolors by Elizabeth. Jack, in his later years and after independence, returned again and again to those scenes in the West, returned again and again to rural landscapes. In this painting, he also is, I think, giving a nod to his connections with the Irish revival. We see Tirnanog means the land of the young, and it's kind of a supernatural place in the Irish mythological tradition. But what we see is a boy reading a book, presumably about kind of some related subject matter. And the revival was, of course, a very literary, middle class, kind of highbrow in some ways movement. Here we see a late Jack that's a land and or seascape. So it's called the Atlantic. And what's really changing is Jack's technique in these later years. He's returning again and again to the same west of Ireland kind of landscapes, but he starts to squeeze the paint right onto the canvas and use a knife as opposed to a brush and so on. So he gets more and more experimental or expressionist. Here's this kind of bookends with a silence. This is another Jack grouping that combines the living and the dead. So it depicts Jack, his wife, Cotty, and his uncle, George Pollexfen, who had died. The other moving thing about this particular painting is that when Jack painted it, his wife is gravely ill, and he gave it to her for her birthday, and she died something like 2 months later. So it's a very moving example of Jack meditating on family and loss. Elizabeth Rivers' book Stranger and Aaron was the last book published by Kula Press before it closed in 1946. In traditional revivalist fashion, she had gone out to the Aran Islands and lived there for a period of time, wrote a book about her experiences there, which included, she was also an artist, and she included sketches. Obviously, another important part of a kind of post-colonial Irish identity was Catholicism. And that's what our final section in the exhibition is devoted to. And I'm actually, Diana and Christian are the real experts
Well,
in this section. So I'm going to turn it over maybe to Christian first for a little bit of context. And then
Sure.
I realize that we're verging on our time here.
Yeah, we're close to the
are.
top of the hour and we can entertain more discussions. So
Yeah.
just to set this up very briefly, I'll give a little of the maybe political, social context, and Diana may want to say more about the embroideries, which she loves so much as we all do.
Well, I might, yeah.
The techniques, yes,
sure.
all right. So to think about this, just some broad themes, right? So Marjorie alluded to the conflict that was the background, hence the play on our title, Collaborating in Conflict. Yes, there were tensions between family members, at times, avoid conflicts and disagreements, but the whole arc of history that we're seeing here from the 1880s through the 1950s was precisely mapping onto this Irish revolutionary period and the transition from being from Ireland being a fully integrated but subordinate part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland to then being an independent nation finally following the Act of Ireland in 1949. So these periods of political transition. And that's the collaborating in conflict against the background of conflict. But that's all a very secular political dimension, okay? What's interesting here is to think about, and why are we suddenly seeing more religious artworks coming out of the Yeats family? After all, the first William Butler Yeats was actually John Butler Yeats's father. He was a reverend. He was a minister in the Church of Ireland and a Protestant evangelical. The Yeats were not particularly sympathetic to Catholicism. They weren't particularly sympathetic to the Irish a rising, an Easter rising, a kind of insurrection in the transition what otherwise would have been to a more harmonious state of a more devolved government within the United Kingdom. So it's interesting that when when Ireland became a kind of free state under as a result of the War of Independence, and then eventually shaking out of the split in the Irish society in the Civil War, were those who agreed with sort of this negotiated treaty with Great Britain, and those who held on for a more fervent nationalism of independence. From that, Eamon de Valera emerged as the political leader of Ireland, and he brought with that strong Catholic values. So he really is the one who established Ireland as being a Catholic nation, and which disappointed many. In fact, many of the women, particularly associated, with the rising, wanted more rights. They wanted to vote. They wanted a more secular society, and they were quite at odds with this transition. So, but in this case, we see an attempt to kind of reconcile with that and to position the artwork that the family was producing in concert with this evolving national identity around Catholicism. So the major event here is in 1932, you have the Eucharistic Congress coming to Dublin. And this Eucharistic Congresses were started in the late 19th century and held in different cities around the world, bringing Catholic believers to an adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. And so coming to Dublin, the idea was, well, this maps onto the 1500th anniversary of the celebration of St. Patrick returning to Ireland as a missionary. And so it was a great way for de Valera and Irish society to display its Catholicism, its new status as a free state, and to assert itself culturally and religiously in the world. So interestingly, we see here against the background, now this is an earlier embroidery that Lily did when she was with Donimer for the church cathedral in Loughrea. Yeah, go ahead. Please say about this, Diana. Yes.
And Diana, if you could juxtapose the two.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that the earlier commission, which was completed in 1904, was when Lily was embroidering with the Dunedin Guild, and that commission was for the St. Brendan's Cathedral in Loughrea in the west of Ireland, which is the most marvelous place. It became a showcase for Irish craft work, and there's many different examples of craft work such as stained glass and stonework, as well as mosaics and embroidery. So Lily's workshop here created 29 banners. They're known as sodality banners, and they were designed specifically for lay associations, which met every Sunday. And the banners were used to designate seating area for these groups. And so the difference, and the other thing that's very striking about these banners is they're all depict Irish saints. So the one you see here, I'm just trying to see where we are. Oh, we're on St. Patrick. Okay. Well, Lily also worked with a number of designers. Most of the male saints were designed by Jack, and most of the female saints were designed by his wife, Cotty, with the exception of two. And actually, St. Patrick here was designed by George Russell, who was the literary revivalist artist and writer friend of Williams. This is a wonderful depiction of St. Patrick banishing the snakes from the land and returning as a bishop here. Are you turning this, Marjorie? I can't see where. Oh, we're on Bridget. Oh, of course. Well, today is St. Bridget's Day, and this is a unique work because it's designed by British American artist Pamela Coleman Smith. And what distinguishes this one from the others, and I didn't even talk about the marvelous embroidery and the marvelous compositions of these bold designs outlined in black. But this particular one is unique because it has painted face and hands of St. Bridget. They're very delicate. It's the only one with painted hands. Okay, I'm done with Loughrea. Oh, no, we can't forget the chasuble. The chasuble is wonderful that we were able to include this in our show. It is an example of one of the colors. These were produced for liturgical seasons in the church. So there were 3 different colors. This is the white set, and it is very exquisite, depicting the 4 evangelists in the most vivid colors and these Celtic motifs that you see around in gold and silver threads. I won't go on too much because I think we're running out of time. Christian, you want to?
Right. So picking up.
Actually,
So
Diana, why don't you finish on the stations?
Yeah, great.
Well, yes, I mean, this is a vast subject because we have 14 stations and they're all incredibly beautifully embroidered. But what I think stands out, this is the first station, which is when Jesus is condemned to death, and it depicts a central figure. He's often, if you go through the stations, you can see that there's a repetition of characters that reappear throughout. In particular, you notice on the left the Roman soldier in his red cloak with headdress. And then the other figure that's so distinct is the very cruel figure of the guard on the right here, who is defined by his stubbly beard and his chest hair and his green vestment. You see him over and over again. This scene is incredibly moving, where Christ surrenders to the cruelty of his captors. And you can see that guard. You don't see his face here, but he had his hammer raised to nail in the nails into the cross. And in the foreground is the guard casting dice against a white ground, which really stands forward. I also wanted to mention that the figure of Christ is often in pale garments, and his white halo distinguishes him throughout this series, whereas the other figures are more rendered in colored garments. The stitching is magnificent. We could go on and on about that, but I don't think we have time.
I don't think we do.
No.
Awesome.
Christian might have more to add. I don't know.
Thank you both. Back to who's moderating questions? Nancy, Rachel?
Yes, well, first let me thank you, Marjorie, Diana, and Christian, for this wonderfully illuminating introduction to collaborating in conflict. Where all of us are really grateful for your scholarship and for the care and the insight you have brought to this exhibition. And now I think we should open this up for questions. I don't see anything at the moment
Okay.
in the chat.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
Well, might leave this up for just a minute. I'd like to say
Okay.
one more thing.
Yeah,
especially since we
definitely.
have
Leave it up because we may want to look.
right. We have
Okay.
the dean of our Morrissey College of Arts and Sciences here at Boston College, Dean Gregory Kalsher, whom we have to thank for bringing these the series, the 14 Stations of the Cross, to our attention, because and maybe I'd invite Father Greg, if he wished to say anything about seeing these when at the novitiate at which he did his formation as a Jesuit seminarian in Wernersville, Pennsylvania. Why were these in Pennsylvania? Well, there was a woman who came to the 1932 Eucharistic Congress who viewed the art exhibition that was run in conjunction with the masses and religious pageants, and was quite taken with them. There were only 3 of them that were done at the time. It was a little bit of a speculative venture on the part of Lily, with the support of William and Bridget O'Brien, designing these just to appeal for this audience, which was not normally a cool audience. And but it worked, and so Genevieve Brady decided to, even though she had a whole set of the Stations of the Cross already for the novitiate that she and her husband Nicholas Brady were funding and constructing in Wernersville, Pennsylvania, to then purchase this additional set for the novitiate. And so they were completed in batches of 3 and sent over the first couple of years of the 1930s following the Eucharistic Congress, and there they remained, for the private use and adoration, contemplation of the novitiates in Wernersville. And it was only when the novitiate eventually went through periods of transition and closure, ultimately, when the question became, well, what should become of this, of these and other artworks? And so Father Greg Kauscher, knowing of our Yeats collections in McMullen and Burns Library, contacted those responsible for the Wernersville and then novitiate, and then offered them to us. And so this is where really they're presented for the first time to the public, and it's quite remarkable the attention they're getting. I don't know if there's anything more that Father Koch would like to perhaps add here, if it's
I don't have too much to add. I'm glad that the stations are being well received in the exhibition, and I'm delighted that they're at Boston College. I was a novice at the Novitiate of St. Isaac Jogues in Warnersville from 1992 to 1993, which was the last year that building functioned as the novitiate for the Maryland province. And when I was there, these stations were not exhibited as a full set of 14. So I don't have any memory of them really as being the stations all there. There were 1 or 2 of them that were in the novices' chapel. So they would have been part of the prayer life of the novices during the time that I was there, and probably for a number of years before that. Couple years ago, when the novitiate building was finally being sold and the various pieces of art and artifacts were being distributed to various places, I became aware that the stations were actually available, and I thought Boston College would be a very good place for them, knowing that they could be, I think, incorporated into a larger intellectual project here and well cared for, and wouldn't have been the case at necessarily any other institution. So I'm delighted that they're here, and it was great to play a role in bringing them here.
Well, and we thank you for it. They really are treasured, and have received an awful lot of attention, and both from Christian and from Diana and Lynn Hulse, who is with us, and she might want to say something as well. Lynn, are you still with us here?
I think you're muted there, Lynn.
Yep, sorry about that. Yes. No, it was an absolute pleasure to have access to this wonderful collection of embroideries and to be able to interrogate them more closely. I mean, it's fascinating to see somebody like Lily Yeats, who has been trained in the sort of arts and crafts tradition with May Morris, William Morris's daughter, although she sort of tended to view herself more as William Morris's pupil rather than a colleague of May. But I think that was a sort of difficult relationship between the two women, which I'll not go into detail about now. But it's fascinating to see the techniques that, or the technique that she was taught at Morris and Co., and how she takes that darning technique and works it in a very different way to the traditional way of working it that we see in English embroideries from the time. And she creates her own approach to the stitch, and it becomes really the hallmark of most of the embroideries that she produces, certainly these embroidered pictures that she produces, right from the Loch Grey banners right through to the work that she did in the sort of early 1940s. So it becomes very much her signature style. And with a very simple stitch, she can create such works of emotion. I mean, they just, I think, blow me away, quite honestly. And I lectured about these, actually. This happened last week to a group of embroiderers, and they were just completely stunned by the quality of Lily's work, not surprisingly.
Mm. Right. And I think, Lynn, one of the things we talked about is depiction of faces. And so
Yes.
we invite you, of course, to come to the galleries and see the shows. I mean, all of these things, seeing it over screen is one thing, but seeing the in person and the stitching, the quality of the threads, the kind of the subtleties of colors. But then it's the evolution of work, right? So in our show, we have examples of when embroidered panels and pillow cushions, from the period when Lily was working with May Morris in the 1890s, through up to these and even to the later 30s. And then you see the evolution of her stitching techniques, and particularly the problematic depiction of faces, and even in the Loch Grey banners, which you were speaking of earlier, Diana, right? Don't you see an evolution there, right? And it's really quite incredible.
Well, it's incredible that we are very privileged to be able to have the two very important ecclesiastical commissions that were done, Loch Grey, in the same gallery with these stations, because it's just an amazing opportunity to see the difference. And anyway.
Yeah, we're privileged, and we reflect on this a lot as curators putting the shows together, that what we've created for you here is something that none of the people of the time would have ever seen together, right? I mean, when the banners went to Loch Grey, they stayed there. Lily probably didn't travel back, to Loch Grey, frankly, to see them after a certain point in her life.
They don't travel much.
And they didn't travel much. And, in producing the Stations of the Cross, again, 3 at a time, she sent them over. She never saw them all together. She never saw them in their frames. And then we get to see everything all together. It's really remarkable what we're.
Well, that's really the beauty of
Yeah,
exhibitions
it
and
is,
why we're all here. Yeah,
Wow.
it's really just such a great opportunity. So,
Can I just throw in, sorry, just one other point that very much struck me by working on Lily Yeats is the fact that she designed very little herself, and she depended on the designs of others. But it's interesting that so many of her works are signed by her. And she obviously viewed these as works of art. These aren't craft. These elevate craft to a serious art form. And in that sense, she's following in the steps of May Morris and the other women who are pioneers of the arts and crafts movement. And it's wonderful to see her bringing that approach to the Celtic revival in Ireland.
And yet in our show too, Lynn, we have examples of what Kula Industries was doing in terms of regular domestic embroideries. We have examples of bonnets, baptismal christening bonnets with a little bit of, embroidered stitching to decorate them, laced, collars. And these would be unsigned works, although they would have kind of a Kula label on the back there. But and then we have wonderful photo reproductions of their exhibition stalls. They would sell these at truly they were craft or art and craft fairs. We have a original banner from one of that we borrowed from Galway. So we're creating that. So it's both. It's the art embroideries and then also embroideries for domestic use and decorations. And
indeed.
really explore that. Yeah.
well, I'm looking in the chat and I don't see any questions in the chat, but there may be people who just want to
Mike.
to ask a question and unmute themselves. So you can also raise your hand and I can call on you if you prefer that. So I'm looking through to see if we have any additional questions here. Nothing here.
Okay.
So if not, it just remains for me to thank our speakers today for a wonderful hour of introduction to the exhibition. And I encourage all of you to experience the exhibition either in person or virtually, and to join us for many of the free programs we're offering in connection with it. The full schedule will be available on our website under the events tab. And I'd also like to note a related exhibition, Celtic Art Across the Ages, which opens at the Harvard Art Museums on March 6th. So this is going to be a wonderful spring for those of you who are especially interested in Ireland and its creative culture.
And if I may even mention one more, Nancy, we have online with us today one of our lenders, Alan Klein. We were looking at the wonderful pastel there of the lake at Cool, and Sandy Neubauer has joined, and they will be having an exhibition at the Grolier Club in New York, opening at the end of April on the Irish Literary Revival on printing books. So there's just a plethora of things that are happening. So thank you, Alan, for your generosity in lending, and for Sandy as well for being here. And Diane and I will, we have an opportunity, we'll be in the gallery this afternoon for any of those of you who might be on the call and want to come over and see the show after about 2 o'clock. We'll be there.
Yeah. Well, we will look forward to welcoming you back to the McMullen. And until then, I just want to say thank you for joining us today, and try to stay warm in this cold weather.
And Lynn, I hope you can get out here to see the show sometime.
I hope so, but we'll
Really hope
see.
so.
We'll see. Anyway, thank you.
Very good.